Welcome to the Assertive Podcast. I'm Erica.
I'm Jess.
And we are licensed professional counselors in Texas, reviewing Am I the Asshole Reddit threads to help you learn skills for communication, healthy boundary setting, and assertive interpersonal functioning. So today we're continuing our series on the 6 core emotions. We've made it to our final energizing emotion, which is fear. We're going to talk about the ups and downs of fear, some general concepts around fear, anxiety, stress. And as always, we'll review this via a Am I the Asshole post. Today's is, Am I the asshole for forcing my partner with social anxiety to meet my family? This is an older post, FYI, so there are going to be some old dates in here. So my fiance, who's 27, and I, who am 28, are getting married next year. We have been dating for almost 8 years. My family was not aware of our relationship as they are very conservative. I only informed them last year about my partner. My parents have not been able to meet my partner face-to-face due to the pandemic. They are now making plans to visit in a few months, but have met him on FaceTime and love him. My fiance has developed severe social anxiety in the last few years. He can still socialize when he needs to for work, but he prefers to keep to himself, me, and his family. FYI, he wasn't always like this. When I met him, he was the social butterfly. My parents and I wanted him to meet my uncle and aunt who live near me. My parents have been wanting him to meet my uncle since May of 2021. He finally caved and met my uncle in December of 2021. The meeting went really well. He told me he will meet my aunt in May of 2022.
It's a long time.
I know. He has a long recovery period there.
Yeah, a year.
It's now August of 2022, and he is still refusing to meet her. He has said I'm selfish for pushing him into a situation that gives him so much anxiety, and he has already, quote, done so much, and I shouldn't keep wanting more. I'm really close to my aunt. She is like a second mom to me, and I really want him to meet her. FYI, I've had to make it out to my family that I'm the one who doesn't want him to meet people to avoid them judging him. They think I'm being unreasonable and ridiculous. My partner has also been seeing a psychologist to help him, but I don't know if it's actually helping. Am I the asshole?
Man, COVID did such curious things to us, didn't it?
It really did.
I can't wait for like 10 years from now when they get all these studies out and we see all the impact. It's going to be so fascinating.
That's one word for it.
Fascinating? Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of words for it, I think. Oh, man. What's your first impressions of this one?
Honestly, I don't think the psychologist is helping.
Yeah.
So I think if he's still not able to meet your close family in one-on-one scenarios, he's not making progress. She doesn't say how long he's been in therapy.
Yeah.
But I would imagine like you should be able to meet one new person.
Yeah, and like they first started putting this on the radar in May of 21. He wasn't willing until December of 21. That's 7 months it took him to be prepared for that. And then in December of 21, he's committing to doing it in May of 2022, which is 5 months. It's now August, so he's pushed that out to 8 months, and he's still unwilling to tolerate that. I think that's extreme avoidance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at this point, maybe there is some anxiety going on. Maybe he just doesn't want to meet your family.
Yeah, it doesn't like it's health anxiety. I wonder if it's maybe some other things going on. We don't know enough about him to know what his triggers are.
Right. Yeah. Pre-pandemic, he was a social butterfly. Pandemic happened, and he obtained a new social anxiety.
Yeah. That happened to a lot of people. It's sad.
It did.
Yeah. Okay, so anxiety in the context of 6 core emotions, we'll use the word fear as kind of the foundational. Anxiety would be a synonym. So the words to describe the emotion we're about to discuss, anxiety, fear, stress, worry, nervousness, uneasiness, freaking out. People do all kinds of stuff. Tripping balls, fever tripping.
Yes, those are all pretty centralized to fear. apprehension.
Good one.
But yeah, those are probably our main ones that people are familiar with.
Okay.
So, fears data that it's communicating to us is that we are in danger and we need to stay safe. Very basic. Too much fear, we tend to get into paranoia.
Mhm.
Not enough fear, we tend to be reckless. So, paranoia, we're managing safety issues when maybe we're not actually in danger. Recklessness, we're not paying attention to safety cues when we maybe are in danger.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
If we had fear as the center, paranoia as like the polar end of too much, I always tell my clients about halfway between the center point and the extreme end is where I usually place anxiety. So I think people are maybe a little bit more familiar with anxiety. It's like it's a little bit of excess of fear, but we're not quite to paranoia, at least for most of my clients.
So if you did like a 1 to 10, you're saying maybe around 7 or something, you'd start getting pretty uncomfortable?
I would say 10 is paranoia, 0 is fear. I'd probably say about 5 is anxiety.
Okay. So we're not including the recklessness on that.
Yeah, no, that's on its own like -10 to 0 scale.
I gotcha. Okay, I like that. So what is the physical sensations when we're moving to a high state and we're about to almost hit us? I mean, panic, is kind of that high response.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel that? Experience that in your body?
I'm definitely a anxious leaning person. I think I definitely feel it in my chest. It feels like a flutter. I can feel my heart rate's increased. I get like really physically restless and I do everything really quick and way too hard. So like I'm brushing my teeth, like I'm trying to like saw my teeth off. Like I'm walking really hard. I'm moving really fast. I seem like pretty flustered. Yeah, and I mean sometimes it'll get more sometimes it goes into anger, but that's a whole other can of worms I don't need to get into right now. But I think the physical cues between those two can feel similar sometimes because it's a surge of like alarm in your body. What about you? What's your physical anxiety cues?
I actually experienced pretty similar heart flutters. I get racing thoughts when I'm anxious, so my mind is just constantly going. I do a lot of things. I don't do them quite as quickly. Like I just move very purposelessly.
Like kind of aimlessly moving, kind of?
Yeah, like I'll find myself like in my bedroom and then I'll walk into the kitchen and I'll do something really random in the kitchen and then I'll go to the living room and do something random there. So I'm not driven with any purpose or direction. I just have this excess energy because obviously it's energizing emotion and I'm just burning it off, but I'm not really doing anything functional for myself, like cleaning. I'm not a stress cleaner, unfortunately.
That is quite unfortunate. That can be an adaptive. Yeah. I mean, I think when I think back, I probably started experiencing anxiety in like elementary school. I really remember it. We had moved and I was like a new kid. And I remember just feeling just uncomfortable, I think was the only way I knew I didn't have like words for that. But yeah, it's the sensation to kind of like get away, to like escape. I felt that like fight or flight kind of response come out. But I think it's, the older we get, the more we can refine that. But I think it's hard, especially for younger kids who have anxiety, to articulate that, and for parents to notice agitation or them just not wanting to do things too,
Yeah. I was trying to think when I was younger, I think the only time I had like the rapid heart rate was with flying the first few times I flew.
That's scary.
But other than that, I don't think I had physical symptoms. It was mostly like mental. Like I would just get stuck in a thought loop and like really go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But it was more of a freeze when I was little.
Oh, Erica's so scared of an airplane. Yeah, so you're like kind of quietly freaking out is what that would have looked like.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. A lot of, I think, like overwhelmed is also a word I hear a lot. And I have a lot of clients who become quite tearful when they're overwhelmed. I think crying can also be like a physical expression of just being overloaded and totally flooded with anxiety too. Yeah, I know, especially if like there's conflict or something like that, there's like a really like raw fear or a tear response. Yeah.
So overwhelm leads me to think about stress. And I want to share this definition we got from curriculum we used when we did substance use treatment.
Mhm.
And it stresses our response to thinking or judging that the demand of an event or situation goes beyond our being able to cope with that situation.
This is why I hate social media. This is why when clients are talking about the tragedies of the world, I'm like, yeah, of course it's stressful. You have no ability to impact that, and you're absorbing the anxiety of people that you can't really make a change for. You probably should stop watching the news. I think it's making you feel helpless.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm all about that. So it's this idea of like I have expectations that are outside my ability to manage is when we
Mhm.
what stress would be.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, and that leads me to into like the idea of like productive and unproductive stress.
mhm.
So we believe emotions are neither good nor bad. So the function of anxiety is to keep us safe. And so I tell my clients what adaptive coping looks like with anxiety is recognizing the threat and then figuring out what you need to do to manage that threat in a safe way. So it's not about turning off the anxiety. We're going to have anxiety. It's part of being a person. It's life. It's not problematic. And so anxiety can help us resolve a lot of things. So I think productive stress looks like action. And unproductive stress is when we're feeling anxious, but there's no other action to be taken. That's when I'm like, okay, now we're
Mm.
in maladaptive stress. The way I help clients kind of figure out the difference between those, because they're uncomfortable, even if it's helping you focus, it's really uncomfortable, is there's a concept called the Yerkes-Dodson curve law, just to help you guys kind of visualize. Imagine it's a graph and there's this nice little bell curve, and so the high point on that would be like we'll say a 1 to 10. A high point would be like a 5, and so the tail ends are low. And what this graph is telling us is that there's this peak optimum stress arousal. We need a little bit of stress arousal because it helps us feel energized and focused. So too low a stress, we're going to be unengaged in our tasks and really lowly motivated. We're going to be bored. Too much stress, we're getting into that primal fear response, and we're not going to be super effective at completing tasks. So the idea is that we do want some stress, but our goal is to keep it within that wide, high curve, middle of the road kind of anxiety there. So when I'm working with high stress clients, I like to have them draw their own curve. I found some clients, usually high performing, maybe even leaning towards perfectionistic clients, tend to like and function well at higher anxiety. So I have one client, their preferred anxiety is like a 7.5. And then I have other clients who are maybe more gentle in nature and they tend to prefer lower. So I had a client select their heat curve as a 3, which means we're going to max out our distress tolerance really early. So we have to have a lot of skills to be able to break that down. So, and with the client who really is high performing and likes that stress, lots of times in session we'll talk about how busy this person is. And I'm like, are you in that prime? And they'll say like, yeah. I'm like, cool, you're plugging along, you're really engaged, you have a lot going on, but you sound pretty excited about stuff. And they're like, yeah. So that's kind of how I introduce the idea of like productive and unproductive stress. What do you talk about your clients with that?
I do it very unscientifically.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, anecdotally, let's do it.
And I basically just tell them it's like procrastination.
Yeah.
And some people cannot do things until they have that pressure or the stress anxiety of it being due right then, because that's in your terms, that's where their bell curve is. And so if you can't motivate yourself to clean your house until the stress of somebody coming over the next day, that's productive stress. So if you're struggling to clean your house, we should probably schedule somebody to come over, because we know that's going to naturally initiate that procrastination defeating stress that you need to get your house cleaned. It's the same with tests. Some stress and worry about tests or exams or projects at work is good, because it's going to ensure that we check the boxes, we study, we prepare. Too much though, and we're frozen and we just can't even pick up the book.
Yeah.
So it's all about finding that balance and figuring out, where is this going to be helpful to me? And at what point is it getting in the way of me accomplishing my goal?
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned procrastination, I think really high anxiety can look like panic, or it can look like complete eject, just, really fight or flight.
Yeah.
And I like to demonize procrastination because I do think it's a way of self-inducing stress, which is
Yes.
that we need that minimal arousal state. So when a client's procrastinating, usually, because I think it's kind of a value signaling that we say balance is best, especially with like my ADHD clients. I'm like, you're probably not going to work that way. You're probably never going to start a paper 5 months in advance. That's not going to happen. So let's be realistic about what gets you going. Versus I have like a low stress client, and that the person who was there is a 3, that person started interview prepping 6 months before they were ready to have a different job, because they need that little low anxiety and they can do a more balanced approach and still manage that stress. So I just have clients lean into their natural wirings on that stress arousal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, the procrastination is a way of like kind of poking at our own internal wiring. I think, going on a roller coaster is the same way. It's making this fear response something fun. We go to haunted houses, we watch scary movies.
Yeah.
We like kind of playing with this emotion and inducing it in ourselves. And sometimes this hard wiring can kind of go awry, where basically it's functioning in situations that aren't really helpful anymore. Just, I guess, kind of like, I think getting into talks of, trauma could be helpful in this. I had a client who was former military, had gotten deployed, was in Afghanistan like right after like 9/11, and was like really heavy into all that time. And apparently there was an issue. He was in a mechanized unit, was like driving vehicles, and there was this threat of explosive devices being placed in plastic bags under bridges.
Mhm.
And so when he was deployed, that was always like a situation. If you saw a plastic bag under a bridge, we need to respond to that. That's assumed to be a threat. And so when he came back, what he was finding is that he is still terrified of plastic bags under bridges. And so when he's driving down 75 in Dallas and goes through an underpass, he's having like a full trauma response about this plastic bag. So, like, to kind of normalize that for him, we talked about tools can be effective at some point, and then at some point they start becoming ineffective, which is maladaptive coping. And so I think that's like kind of really good example of what it looks like in like trauma and hypervigilance. I know you work with a lot of clients who have that history. Can you tell us a little about that?
So in my clients, I get it both with my clients who have had physical trauma, but I also work with a lot of people who grew up with emotional neglect or emotional abuse, and so they have some emotional trauma scars as well. Presentation varies, but typically they're in this high alert state and they don't really feel safe or comfortable anywhere.
Yeah.
And so we get a lot of social anxiety from this, fears with dating. For those who have a history of sexual trauma is a big thing. It's hard for them to distinguish safety from harm, right? And so we do a lot of work on how do we know if somebody's safe?
Like green flags, red flags. We have yellow
Yes.
flags too. But yeah, we make those
Yes.
lists. And I think with the hypervigilance, because it is so hardwired to become paranoid once you've had a lot of harm, it makes perfect sense why we would get to that point. A book that was really impactful back when I was in grad school that kind of started this idea of like body keeping the scores. And the body keeps the score. It kind of, I'm obviously way overgeneralizing. It's this idea that your body can remember things that's happened to it. And sometimes your body will respond to things outside of your conscious awareness of what's really occurring also. And so a lot of times when we're feeling hypervigilant or having a trauma response, it can be really confusing because we didn't necessarily have awareness of the precipitating events. Our body is responding to something outside of our awareness, which I think is just fascinating. But so a lot of the times with the trauma, it's, CBT isn't really going to work when you're not aware of the thoughts that you're having and your body is kind of reacting. And so this is really where those grounding techniques come in, of like getting back into our body and just kind of creating that unity, which we'll talk more about in the second episode on anxiety, but creating that unity between like the mind and the body where they're talking to one another again.
Yeah. We differentiate those in the field between top down, so working from brain to body processes, or bottom up processes where we start in the body to affect the mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
we covered some grounding and anger, but we get more into that. And so back in the day when we were doing, we meaning people in the field of psychology, we're doing experiments, there was some like unethical savagery going on. We didn't maybe at that
yeah.
time know how impactful that was.
Yeah. Before we had ethic boards that had to
Mm.
approve each step of the experiment and assess for harm and make you account for how you were going to mitigate harm to your participants.
We got some really interesting data points. We had this Zimbardo prison study. We got all kinds of stuff that came out of that was
Yes.
just like psychological understanding gold mine, but at the expense of the participants. So somebody's that coming to mind for me, I know that you like to talk about this, is the baby Albert experiment. Tell us about that one.
Yes. So, little Albert is an experiment that was initially done to see if they could condition fear. So, what they did was they took baby Albert, who was about 9 months old, and they exposed him to various objects. So, there was a white rat, a rabbit, and a couple of other things. I don't remember them all. Initially, he wasn't afraid of anything that he was shown. So then they brought back the rat, and when the rat was presented in front of little Albert, they made a loud noise behind his head. And so naturally that startled him, and he began to cry after he heard the loud noise. So they repeated this. So every time they would put the white rat down in front of him, then they would make the sound, and eventually he would start to cry just from seeing the rat. They wouldn't have to do the loud noise anymore. So they're like, oh, cool. We conditioned a fear response. Great. The unintended nugget of knowledge we got from this was little baby Albert also then became afraid of anything else that was white and fluffy. So Santa Claus's beard would frighten him, or one of the experimenters had a fur coat, and he would become frightened with the fur coat. And so from this, we got what we now call generalizations, to where we have one circumstance happen and we take the data from that and apply it to everything that seems similar in nature.
Yeah, because our brains are wired towards schemas. So it was like you were mentioning with okay, I've had bad experience with maybe one kind of person, and now all, these kind of people I'm afraid of, or all men are scary, or dating is always bad, and those things.
Yeah.
Where's baby Albert now? He's probably dead. He's probably a very old man. I hope he got some help and he could sit on Santa's lap and go to the Easter Bunny and all that.
He probably did not, because therapy was not normalized back then.
Yeah, it was parents like, what the hell? We didn't know we were signing up for this. Oh, baby Albert.
Baby Albert.
Poor little bugger. Shout out to baby Albert. Yeah.
Thanks for your contribution.
Thank you for your contribution.
But that makes sense if you think about not only the purpose of fear, but how we are hardwired to survive, right? If we ate this plant and it was poisonous and half of our people died, and this plant looks just like it, but slightly different, we should maybe have some caution. Let's not feed it to everybody.
Yeah. Or if one kind of, animal is looking scary, then we're going to kind of qualify, anything with forward facing eyeballs is a threat, kind of thing. Okay.
So that's baby Albert. What type of generalizations do you find your clients struggling with?
Ooh, like my high anxiety clients. I mean, this is probably low hanging fruit. I think the biggest one would be framed as conflict, which I would frame as difficult conversations. So this could come up with a partner, with a boss. I talk about those a lot. I mean, I got some clients who are almost agoraphobic, who don't almost leave their house. So that, yeah. So that, I think there's like a general fear that a sense of impending doom will happen. I think that really comes from a lot of people consuming a lot of media, that like, I'm going to be shot if I go into a store, I'm going to get into a car accident, this person's going to assault me. Really just kind of overestimating the likelihood of crime of some kind or some kind of tragedy. if I get in a car, I'm going to die. All of these things. I think that the world is just very threatening, and at any moment you could be killed.
That's fair.
Talk about like fear response going awry and trying so hard to keep themselves safe. It is
Yeah,
scary out there.
it is. In
Yeah.
your guest appearance on Authentically Intuitive, you guys
Mhm.
were talking about locus of control, and part of the dysfunction with fear and anxiety when it gets harmful is we're becoming afraid of things we don't have any control of. And so trying to manage the things that are within our control to help us with managing anxiety.
Yeah, and that's what they found was the biggest thing for like chronic stress was that people are focusing on things that they cannot impact. And so I freaking like love this documentary on Netflix called Living to 100 Secret to the Blue Zone. That they talk about just how to have longevity and wellness late in life. And one of the things they found between all the different pockets of centenarians across the world is that they did a really good job with stress management. And what they found was that these people are isolated. And so if I'm in the mountains in Italy and all I have to worry about is my herd of goats, and I'm a capable shepherd, I'm going to have low stress.
It's
And
fair.
so I don't get on a soapbox. I know I'm inclined to soapboxes, so I manage it. But I think it's one of my frustrations as a therapist is the amount of social media that people are consuming and the amount of time that people are spent obsessing about issues that they have no impact on. Because of course you're going to feel helpless and stressed. Like you can't change that. And so I think, yeah, and going back to if you don't have control over it, you kind of have to let it go. You
Yeah.
know, you sort through the anxiety. What are the action points I can take? The action points I cannot take, I have to be willing to not obsess about that anymore. Which is difficult.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
Takes a level of acceptance of, I always think of the Serenity Prayer.
I love that one.
I don't even remember it, but I know it says it.
It says God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Which
Yeah.
that is the essence of stress management and the key to peace.
Yes.
The result of that is serenity if you function that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I especially think with the efforts to destigmatize mental health, I think that's been great. I think we're also have skewed a little far where we are so focused on being comfortable that we've kind of damaged our relationship with stress. And the way that I talk about this with clients is I frame anxiety like I would like the immune system, where you have to get exposure to these triggers to build up antibodies to be able to fight them. So if I'm bubble boy and I have no immune system, I'm going out in the world completely protected from this stress. As soon as I get a stress pathogen, it's going to kill me. I'm not going to be able to tolerate it. And so I like to describe, exposure therapy or like not avoidance as being like you're getting a vaccine for stress. You're like inoculated with stress. And so you're building up these antibodies in this immune system so that you have better distress tolerance. So the worst thing you can do to manage stress is to avoid stress, like, which is uncomfortable. And lots of people really don't like to hear that. People want to come to therapy thinking, I'm never going to feel stressed again. I was like, that would be damaging to you, and I will never tell you that. But I think it's just this uncomfortable emotion that we want to avoid. And like from the Yerkes-Dodson curve law, from the hypervigilance, we really need stress to function and to keep us engaged.
Very true.
Yeah.
With that, the thing with exposure therapy, I am probably giving exposure therapy homework once a week to somebody. And I always, because everybody's like, how do I deal with X, Y, and Z? I don't think you're going to like the answer. But the answer is you just need to go and do it. They're
Don't
like,
deal with X.
One of my clients recently had a health scare.
Yeah.
Pretty serious, and started to have some fear with falling asleep. Like, what if my symptoms worsen, but I'm sleeping and so I'm unaware? Some fear of what if I go to sleep and I don't wake up? They're like, how do I manage this? I was like, we can give you some skills to fall asleep. But that pre-anxiety, the only way you're going to get over that is good old exposure therapy. Every time you go to sleep and wake up, you're training your brain like it's okay to go to sleep.
It's like a new data point to combat that need for
Yeah.
avoidance.
Yeah. Like,
I hate that.
I don't know what to tell you, but that's the answer, to just go do it.
I
And when
did
it
the
doesn't kill you, you'll be fine.
and then you get into like, okay, well, if you're still continuing to be afraid of that, we're obviously getting into thought errors, which like we're
Yep.
being rigid in our thought habits, and we need to disrupt that. I think I've since I got into private practice, it's been post-COVID. I for sure do the most exposure therapy with social stuff. Where like maybe number 10 is like go on a date, and then number 1 is like think about who maybe I'm attracted to, or compliment a stranger. And it's like these kind of like stair step things. So we're not saying jump in the deep end and panic and go through that. There's a way to do it gradually, but like you're going to have to go through it. You're going to have to feel stress, which is devastating to clients.
They're like, this is not what I came here for.
We always laugh about it. And I'm like, they'll be like, fuck you, Jess. And I'm like, I know, you love it. You love coming to therapy. But it's that willingness. And I think we just have to learn of like, just because this feels uncomfortable does not mean this is bad. If a professional is telling me that this is healthy for me, I think I can trust that a little bit too. But take some rapport, all of that stuff. And one of the things when we talk about stress being helpful, I want to talk a little bit about perfectionism. I think perfectionism has become quite adaptive and quite praised. I think we really, as a American culture, value like hyper productivity, high efficiency, all of those things. And when I'm working with a client with perfectionism, we're inducing a sense that there's a sense of harm if something is done inefficiently. And so a lot of times I just start checking in on what are the rules that we're playing. If I am a person, as I am, I get to write the rules that I follow. I get to play the game and I get to referee it. And so if I don't like how the game is going, I don't have to keep playing by those rules. So if I say the most important thing about the dishes is that the dishwasher be loaded in an impeccable, efficient state, that's a rule that I've made up that isn't necessarily better or worse than being more relaxed about it or having space for that. And so a lot with the perfectionism, it's these sense of risks that are coming from breaking your own rules. It's the fear of failing your own standards.
This is one of those complex, because I'm hearing a lot of like the shame piece of shame is telling us we're breaking our own rules.
Yep.
Right.
Like guilt and all of those things.
Yep. So it's getting, emotions are often interconnected. Rarely are we experiencing just one emotion at a time. Yeah. And this is a perfect example with perfectionism. And then there's this sense of shame or guilt, embarrassment if things are not done perfectly.
Totally. And so like if I have a couple clients who are very perfectionistic, we will literally, it's almost like with OCD, like you have to purposely do that poorly. You have to send that email without proofreading it. What's that going to be like? You have to delegate a vacuuming to your partner, and you can't criticize what happens if they don't do it. So it's exposing them to their own rule violations, which can be distressing, but I think also really relieving to know that the only sense of threat is my own mind. There isn't actually anything wrong if it's not super efficient. I love perfectionists. They're so fun to work with. High performing.
Yes. When we talk about the fear piece with perfectionists, I often find, and I don't know if this is similar with your perfectionist clients, mine are often brought up in a highly critical environment. So they have parents who often criticize them. And so whether that was verbally abusing them or chastising them, or there was some physical punishment. And so being perfect was a safety issue. I have to clean my room perfectly or I'm going to get a spanking. Or my dad's going to yell at me for 10 to 20 minutes, and that's going to be really uncomfortable. And that's going to be scary because I'm 5 and he's this big guy.
to talk about that being like a tool that's been helpful to like avoid a risk, and now in adulthood it's becoming problematic. That's a
Mm-hmm.
good, really good example of that.
Yeah.
I have some clients too who just they're hyper. I mean, there's some birth order things that go into a lot of this too. There's high performing people in general, or even the rules within the family of origin. Sometimes
Yes.
a rule of like we don't waste. So if they spend money on something they don't absolutely need, right? There's the guilt that comes. So this anxiety of like I have to price compare, I have to make sure I really, really want it. It's like all these things when like we're just following the rules of other
Yeah.
people that we don't really hold those same values sometimes. Oh, stress.
Stress, good old stress. One thing we haven't gone in too deep with as far as hardwiring and the brain structure is the fear responses.
Mm-hmm.
You want to take us through fear responses or at least get us started?
Mm-hmm. The way that our brain permits us to respond to stress is by resolving the threat. And so I think we've all heard of the flight, freeze, flee, and now we have fawning, which is attaching to the risk actually. So the fight response is basically the good pairing between anger and anxiety, where we use those high energy emotions to get quite combative. So in the good way, this can look like if I'm walking down a dark alley and somebody goes to mug me, maybe my response is to fight them off. I'm like protecting myself. That obviously becomes problematic when nobody is actually threatening us, and now if we're fighting things that don't need that aren't actually a harm.
Mm-hmm.
The flee response a lot of times for that now in modern times just looks like avoidance.
Yep.
In the past it would have been like literally turning the other way and running, which again, if I'm going to get mugged in an alley, that still will probably work. I'm going to create distance. It's going to be harder for that threat to capture me. But in modern times, it's avoidance. So that can look like the really dark side of procrastination, where we just slowly lose our tolerance for anxiety over time. We just kind of start to invest less and less in our lives. And then freezing, when people are freezers, they hate being freezers. Like I just froze and I was like a deer in headlights. The freeze response is just our system is overloaded, and
Mm-hmm.
we come to a spot where that autopilot gets disrupted because we just are flooded with panic, basically. So this sometimes can look like with the mugging situation of like a full shutdown of like, I'm not going to do anything to aggravate this offender. I'm just going to hope that this kind of rides out and that nothing worse happens there.
Mm-hmm.
Again, when that happens in conflict, in present times, a lot of time that can just look like cold shouldering, high introversion, difficulty initiating and sustaining difficult conversations, needing timeouts really frequently. The when did the idea of like fawning become a thing?
I would say in the last maybe 2 to 5 years. I see it more in social media than probably the last 2 years when it became more popular in academic arenas. I'm not really sure. Definitely not while I was in school, which isn't saying much because we've been out of school for almost 10 years now.
I know, like God, everybody's getting old, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. The fawning is
But
that it's. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, I was just going to say fawning is more, you think of like Stockholm syndrome, right? Where you just align with the risk in hopes that aligning with them keeps you safe. So these are more of our people pleasers. If I just do what they want, they won't harm me.
Yeah, I think sometimes like dissociation can come in that too when we think about grooming. Of
Yeah.
when I have clients who've had a history of specifically sexual abuse as children, there's this process of like it was just confusing. I didn't want to bother them, but there's this person that I love. I know them really well, and so this very confusing like bonding thing that happens. And usually they'll just say, "I don't know what to do," and I just thought if I let him do it, he would stop eventually. I get that a lot also, which that could also be a freeze. But
Yeah. So we've done a lot with too much.
Yep.
And truthfully, I'm in my practice, the too much factor. I get the high functioning anxiety perfectionists, people pleasers. But we also have our too low anxiety or too low fear, which is going to put us closer to recklessness. Risk taking would probably be moved over into that side of the spectrum. What are maybe some reckless things you may see your clients doing?
Yeah, I think there's certain lifespans, especially for males, where recklessness is a part of development, of like pushing your body, pushing limits, saying what you're capable of. I think that's a peer function a lot of times too. It's like this physical way of like physically maturing. But obviously it becomes dangerous. I think the archetype I describe with recklessness is like, imagine like an 18-year-old boy on a motorcycle on the highway. Like, we'll have an archetype because we know exactly that person's going to be going 120 miles an hour, weaving in and out of traffic. Maybe it doesn't have a helmet on and popping wheelies. So recklessness is basically a disregarding of threats when there are threats. So if you're not unsafe, just because you're not stressed doesn't mean you're being reckless. But this is when there actively is the threat and you're disregarding it. A lot of times this can come from low impulse control, which I see with a lot of clients. So again, younger clients are more inclined to this. So it's that difficulty with saying, if I do this down the road, it will produce this. So that's where we get those invincibility complexes, like I'm untouchable, which again, a normal part of brain development would be, we learn that we're not invincible in early 20s usually. And so I think a lot of the recklessness, when you think about even diagnostic criteria with things like substance abuse, they'll say things like continued use despite negative consequences, continued use despite physical harm, continued use despite damaging a work or personal relationships. And so I think substance abuse, and obviously substances cut off that part of your brain that helps you think consequentially. So you combine that with impulse control, lower inhibitions from being intoxicated, and you kind of got a recipe for putting yourself in pretty unsafe situations.
Yeah. I think that's fair to say with all the addictive or majority of the addictive processes, because gambling, that's part of it. You take more and more risk.
Yeah. Yep. I think in flavors of recklessness I've seen lately, I don't want to overshare. Basically, I had a client get robbed, and then they chased this homeless person to this homeless encampment and tried to find them, and then went to somebody else's apartment to try to find their stuff. That's kind of risky. This person's unpredictable. We can get the police involved. We went vigilante on it, but that's probably the most recent example of like recklessness I've had.
Wow.
Oh, and I'm like laughing because it's an absurd story, but we're like, okay, didn't get murdered. That's good. Yeah.
That's definitely like a fight response. And that's to me, I would say that's over functioning with fight, because like they sought the
strategizing.
Like the person fled and you could have resumed your normal level, like let your adrenaline start to decrease, but you decided to keep it ramped up and chase him down.
Oh no, there was like an hour. He went through the security footage. He called the cops. He had an air tag in his wallet and then went and chased this guy down like an hour later.
Damn.
Yeah.
He was dedicated to get his shit back.
Yeah. And like, I think, obviously when you're a victim of a crime, that's very violating. I think there's a lot of other things that fuel that. But yeah, that was way more, that's almost like the premeditated version of anxiety. Like you put a lot of strategizing into finding this person. Yeah, but I mean, it is probably, a little stereotypical, but I generally have my men have more issues with recklessness.
It's interesting, like physical recklessness, I think men take the cake.
Yeah.
Emotional recklessness is actually my women, because they will like suppress their needs and like just give and give and give until they have absolutely nothing left. And I'd be like, you're being pretty reckless with your own needs there. You have some things that need to be met. You need to be telling some people no.
Yeah.
That you're giving, which I think is just how our brains are naturally developed. Men tend to be more physical. Women tend to be more emotional. So that makes sense.
Yeah, I like that perspective. You're right. Like, or even, attaching to unsafe people, being vulnerable to people we should not be vulnerable to. I think that's a really good differentiation. There's this, I don't know what you would call it. It's like kind of this loop video that plays at the gym. It's called Chive TV. And one of the little segments will be like, people are amazing or something like that. And there's this one where there's this person in this full like dinosaur costume antagonizing an alligator. And I said, there is like a 0% chance that's a woman in that costume. That's just not going to be a chicken there. I just know it. And we're like laughing. We're like, there's probably something to that of those limit pushing kind of things. But we even see this like my little nephew's about 1.5 years, and that's a big function of toddlers, where the parents like, I just can't stop him from killing himself. Like he's climbing all over everything, getting into stuff. They're really curious, and so there's times where again recklessness is normal part of development, is part of like detaching and testing yourself. But it's terrifying to the people around you.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Yep. So now that we kind of have a grasp on fear, too much, too little, in our post, he's obviously struggling with too much fear. It sounds like where he's afraid to socialize, where he previously was a social butterfly. So again, maybe stuck with some generalizations about health or whatever that may have been. That was his trigger. I'm going with health because it seemed to be around pandemic time that this started. So I see generalization. I see avoidance. So that flee fear response. When he's saying, I'm selfish for pushing him into a situation that gives him so much anxiety. And he's already done so much. I almost feel like that is victim stancing. Which if you go to our thought errors episode in season 1, we talk about different common thought errors. Victim stancing, you're somehow always the victim, where your fiance has given you a year and a half plus to meet 2 people.
This is a really patient person. God,
I would have dumped. I can't do this shit. So
I mean, you're talking in our prep, like, how's this person gonna have a wedding?
I didn't say that. He can't like meet 2 people. How is he gonna be the center of a huge social event? Maybe he's gonna be drunk the whole time. We don't know.
Right, we get into recklessness. Right, that's right. That works. Yeah, and this is not like, that's what I think happened with COVID, right? If we're already kind of wired towards social anxiety and we're not getting that steady vaccine of exposure to people, we get so avoidant, and now it's really hard to like let us back out into the wild. And I think this person might be experiencing that. Yeah. And I think, I mean, I'm kind of, this last paragraph where the author has told her family, I'm not bringing him around because you guys are going to judge him. That is really flipping things around. Everyone's kind of pointing the finger at everybody else in kind of this icky way, where she's saying basically there's something wrong with you, which is why he won't come over. And I think that's pretty manipulative.
So how I understood it is at the very beginning of the post, she hit the relationship. They were together 8 years. And for 7 of those years, her family was in the dark because they're supposedly conservative and judgy. So one is the partner. I'm probably already going to have anxiety because you've kept me in the closet for 7 years of our relationship. But now all of a sudden, it's really important for me to meet them like right this second.
Yeah.
I'm petty by nature. I might draw that out just because it wasn't a problem 7 years ago. These past 7 years, why are we in such a hurry now?
Yeah, there you go.
But then I'm hearing that she's taking the blame. So she's telling her family, I don't want him to meet you. Right? Is that how I have had to take it on that I'm the one who doesn't want him to meet people? What?
Yeah, I've had to make it out to my family that I'm the one who doesn't want him to meet people to avoid them judging him.
Yes, she's worried that if they know he has social anxiety and that's why he's not meeting them, they're going to judge him for that. So she's saying, I'm the reason why you guys can't meet. I can't make it to this meeting this weekend. I have work, or I don't think this is a good time, or I'm not feeling well. So she's never putting it on him, not even like he's sick this weekend, we need to reschedule. It's I'm sick this weekend. So she's doing a lot of enabling.
She is. I read that totally different, which we don't necessarily need to get into the weeds about that. I thought she was saying more of, I've continued to not bring him around because you're so judgmental, and then they're saying you're being ridiculous and unreasonable. That she's saying, that's how I thought, because she's saying they're conservative, which is the reason, which makes me think not judging him about anxiety, judging him about whatever particular thing would violate their family norms is how I understood that. But I can, yeah, that piece of information would be helpful to know. There's different connotations that go in there, but she is trying to protect him. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Either way, yeah.
So if the author was your client, would you encourage her to tell her family directly why the fiance is not coming around?
Mm-hmm. I would say a couple conversations need to happen. One is with the family and just let them know, like, this isn't a you thing. This isn't a me thing. You just had some anxiety and we're working through it. Hopefully he's ready by the wedding.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully he can meet you guys sooner. I'd be having a conversation with him. I think sharing with him how it feels for her. I can imagine feeling really hurt that you can muster up enough energy to do social things that you need to get through, but a simple 2-hour lunch with my aunt is too much. Like, I imagine this is not going to be an all-day meeting. I imagine they're going to meet up for lunch or dinner or something.
Yeah. I met me too. She inviting him to like a weekend getaway.
Yeah.
Talk about exposure therapy. To start at lunch. Right. We can do that. Do that too.
Yeah. Walk in the park, something.
Right. Yeah, you're saying because he's able to go to work, and she said, he can still socialize when he needs to for like work, but he prefers to keep to himself, his family, and me.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's like if you're capable of doing it in these domains, but you're not willing to prioritize what I'm needing to.
Yeah. These two people.
Yeah, I don't think she's asking for a lot here.
No.
Yeah. And I think I would also have a conversation, if I was the author, I'd have the conversation with the fiance of, I'm feeling like I'm playing diplomat between my family and you, and it's making me feel disingenuous. And if they ask me again why you're not coming around, I'm going to tell them it's because you have anxiety and you're avoiding it. If you want a different narrative to be told, I'm open to your thoughts, but I'm probably going to encourage you to tell that narrative instead of me. So I think I'd have that conversation too of like, yeah. I'm not going to protect you from this anymore. We're 8 years in. That's a long time. This isn't like a new boyfriend situation.
Yeah.
You know?
Like, there are a lot of ways to work through that.
He's meeting like one person every like 9 months and being like, I'm doing so much. Oh, you're not going to be able to have a wedding for like 30 or 40 years at that pace. Got to meet the whole wedding, all the guest list. Lord. So on the asshole verdict, what do you think? Is the author the asshole?
I actually think she is the asshole.
Okay.
I don't know if that was my initial thought when I first read this, but I think she's the asshole because she's enabling him.
Yeah.
And I think she needs to communicate better with him, communicate better with her family. And I think she needs to communicate her expectations and set some hard limits in that relationship, or things aren't ever going to change.
Yeah. Both
so
with the parents and the fiance, I think.
Yeah. So I think by just doing nothing and venting on Reddit, you're just allowing the circumstance to stay the same.
Yeah. I hear, the extent that we're going to protect this person from their anxiety, I think is definitely maladaptive. I do think the author is the asshole for that. I do think the fiance is taking a victim stance, like you said. I think he's also an asshole.
For sure.
I think he's not willing to do something hard for his partner. I mean, I'm sure in this situation, at least. And I think it's understandable that the author is hurt by that, given that he's functioning in a lot of different domains. So it's kind of like a lack of energy tank, I think, is what's happening there. Yeah, I don't think parents don't seem like assholes. Auntie is not an asshole. I think everybody else is just open to how much he's willing to give, which is cool. So summarize this bad boy for us.
Okay. Fear gives us the data that we are in danger, and its goal is to keep us safe. When we exhibit too much fear, we see paranoia. Some benchmarks on the way to paranoia are going to be worry, stress, anxiety. On the flip side, too little anxiety, we have recklessness, risk-taking. See, maybe some ambivalence to danger might be some good benchmarks for that direction. We can have some productive worry and productive fear, which helps us plan for the future. So with test or cleaning, We may need a little bit of that procrastination to get us to our primal functioning with stress. If we are below that or above that, it does tend to hinder us from making progress, and we end up typically staying stuck and not getting whatever we needed to do done. Generalizations happen when we apply data from one circumstance to another. Sometimes that is transferable data and that can help us. Sometimes it's not, and we need to assess each situation individually and get data for each one so we can not generalize. I think of stereotypes a lot with that.
Oh, yeah.
Stereotypes are a form of generalizations. We had our fear responses. We have flight, which we're just fleeing. A lot of times this looks like avoidance. We have fight, which we're fighting back. We have freeze, so we're just going to stay still and hope if we don't make any sudden movements, people won't notice us. And then we have bond, which is to align with the risk and attempt to please and hope that if you can't beat them, join them type of mentality. Some other functions we see with anxiety or high anxiety is perfectionism. So if you're a perfectionist, not always productive, you're probably in a high energized state, which probably leaves less energy for other domains of life.
Oh, yeah.
And we do actually need fear, stress, anxiety, worry. Again, all of our emotions are helpful and useful to us. And we will give you a lot of exposure therapy so you can get small doses of things that frighten you that are actually safe for you to engage in to essentially help build your stress immune system.
Yeah.
Did I miss any points?
No, you did good on that.
Yay, pass my pop quiz.
Yay.
All right, that's what we have for you guys on this one. As always, we would love to hear your thoughts, comments, feedback. You can find us on Instagram at Assertive Podcast or send questions to assertivepodcast@gmail.com. Until next time.